My wedding day. My wedding day. It was supposed to be a whirlwind of happiness, a day filled with love and celebration. But my sister, Helen, had other plans. When I first told my family about the date, she feigned indifference. "Oh, you're having a small, simple wedding anyway, right?" she said, with a casual smile. "So it's fine if our weddings are on the same day." At first, I thought I'd misheard her. But no, she had deliberately planned her wedding for the exact same date as mine. She knew this meant all our relatives and family friends would be at her ceremony instead of mine. My heart sank, but I didn't say anything. I should have known better than to expect anything different from her. 3 months crawled by, and finally, the big day arrived. I was a bundle of nerves and excitement, standing in my wedding gown, surrounded by a handful of close friends. I tried not to think about Helen, but deep down, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my chest. Then, just as the reception was in full swing, I turned and there she was, Helen, in her wedding dress. I blinked, unable to believe my eyes. "Helen, what's going on? Why are you here? What happened to your wedding?" She smirked, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Oh, I got curious. Your reception looked like so much fun, so I came to see for myself." I clenched my fists, but I forced a smile. I wouldn't let her ruin this day for me. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Patricia. I'm 29 years old, and I've been working at the same company since I graduated high school. I started as a junior employee, but after years of hard work and dedication, I earned recognition and respect in the office. My job was fulfilling, and life was good. 3 years ago, I met Ryan. He was kind, funny, and treated me in a way no one ever had before. We started dating, and with each passing day, I fell for him more. Then, one evening, he got down on one knee and asked me to marry him. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, and for a moment, I thought I was dreaming. "But, are you sure?" I blurted out without thinking. "Are you really okay with someone like me?" Ryan chuckled softly and took my hands in his. "It has to be you, Patricia. No one else." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded. I had never been so happy. A few days later, Ryan took me to meet his parents. I was nervous, but they were warm and welcoming. "Patricia," his mother said with a smile, "it makes us so happy to have someone like you as our son's partner." I bowed my head slightly, feeling shy. "Thank you for saying that, but honestly, I'm the lucky one." "There's no need to be so modest," his father chuckled. Everything was going smoothly until he said something that made my breath hitch. "I would like to meet your family as well, Patricia. It's important that both families get to know each other." My stomach twisted. "Oh, why, yes, of course," I said quickly. Ryan squeezed my hand. "Patricia, if you're uncomfortable, we don't have to rush things." I forced a smile. "I'll be fine, Ryan." But the truth was, I wasn't fine. My family didn't love me. I had a reason for feeling uneasy about introducing Ryan into my family. Unlike Ryan's parents, who were kind and accepting, my own family had never treated me that way. My older sister, Helen, was breathtakingly beautiful. Even as a child, she had been admired by everyone. She worked as a child model, and in high school, she became a well-known reader model. My parents doted on her, praised her, and showered her with attention. And me? I was the quiet, ordinary daughter. The one no one paid attention to, the one who was always in Helen's shadow. No matter what I did, I could never be good enough in their eyes. That's why, deep down, I knew my wedding wouldn't be a priority for them. And when Helen chose to get married on the same day, she proved it once again. But no matter what she did, I wasn't going to let her take this moment away from me. Growing up, I learned one painful truth. I would never be as important as my sister, Helen. She was beautiful, charming, and adored by everyone, especially our parents. Meanwhile, I was the forgotten child, the one they barely paid attention to. Since I wasn't as cute as Helen, my parents didn't see the point in spending money on me. Love and affection were things I could only watch from a distance, but never experience for myself. Helen was showered with praise, forgiven for every mistake, and given anything she desired. But for me, there was nothing. If I dared to ask for something I wanted, I was scolded for being selfish. When I expressed interest in activities like music or art, I was told they were a waste of time and money. It wasn't long before I stopped asking for anything at all. While Helen had the best of everything, I had only hand-me-downs, her old clothes, her worn-out school supplies, even toys she no longer cared about. My mother cooked meals with love, but only Helen's favorite foods ever made it to the table. If I didn't like something, I had to eat it anyway. The worst part was my birthday. You would think that at least on that one day I would be treated with a little bit of warmth. But no. Every year my sister received a gift on my birthday, and it was always bigger, more expensive, and more thoughtful than whatever small present I was given. It felt like a cruel joke, a reminder that even on my special day, Helen was more important. My parents often sighed and said, "Why can't you be cute? Like Helen?" Their words stung. No matter how much I wanted their love, I would never be enough. Helen wasn't just our parents' favorite. She knew it, and because of that, she treated me however she pleased. As a child, she would take things from me just because she could. If I protested, she'd smirk and remind me that Mom and Dad would always take her side. And she was right. If I ever argued with her, our parents would scold me, not her. By the time we reached middle school, her cruelty had escalated. There was a boy I secretly liked, someone I never even had the courage to talk to. But somehow, Helen found out. Instead of teasing me like a normal sister might, she did something worse. She approached him herself, acted charming and sweet, and within days they were dating. She would hold his hand in front of me, giggle as she whispered things in his ear, all while glancing my way, as if to say, "Look what I took from you." But that wasn't the worst part. Helen knew my secrets, things I had shared in confidence or things I had hidden deep inside, and she used them against me. Somehow, boys I had never even spoken to knew things about me, embarrassing things. At first, I couldn't figure out how, but then I saw Helen laughing with her friends as she told stories about me, throwing out my secrets like they were nothing. I wanted to fight back, to defend myself, but I knew it would be useless. If I so much as raised my voice against Helen, our parents would come down on me like a storm. So I learned to endure, a lonely fight for recognition. Because I received no love from my family, I desperately sought validation elsewhere. I turned to my studies, hoping that if I became the best student, my parents would finally notice me. I worked harder than anyone else, staying up late, studying tirelessly, and scoring top marks on every test. One day, after months of effort, I achieved something incredible. I ranked first in my entire grade. My heart swelled with pride, and for the first time in my life, I believed my parents might finally say, "We're proud of you." Excitedly, I ran home to tell them the news, but their reaction crushed me. "Don't stand out in weird ways," my mother said flatly. "It would be embarrassing for Helen if people thought you were better than her." I froze. I had expected indifference, maybe even a half-hearted, "That's nice." But this was worse than anything I could have imagined. That was the moment I realized it didn't matter what I did. I would never be good enough for them. Still, I couldn't bring myself to give up entirely. I loved learning, even if my achievements meant nothing to my family. But I was terrified of being resented even more, so I began intentionally making small mistakes on my tests. I still ranked well, but never too high, just enough to keep my position around 10th place. Eventually, I managed to convince my parents to let me attend the best high school in town. My argument was simple. It was actually cheaper than some of the other public schools. The only reason they agreed was because they thought they were saving money. But when it came time to go to university, I didn't even get the chance to fight. "We've wasted enough money on you," my parents said. "It's time for you to start working and pay us back." My heart shattered. Unlike Helen, who had everything handed to her, I was expected to give up my dreams. My high school was filled with students who were preparing for prestigious universities, but for me, college wasn't even an option. When my teacher noticed I wasn't applying anywhere, he asked me, why? I hesitated, but eventually, I told him the truth. His expression darkened, his voice filled with sadness as he sighed. I wish I could help, but it's a family matter. There's nothing I can do. And just like that, my future slipped through my fingers. I had worked so hard, only to be told it was all for nothing. My teacher didn't stop there, though. He helped me find a job and even arranged an interview for me at the company I still work for today. I was grateful beyond words. When I told my parents that I got the job, I hoped for at least a small sign of happiness from them. Instead, they barely reacted. "Just make sure you bring in money," they said. That was all. No congratulations, no encouragement. Just another reminder that to them, I was only useful if I could provide something. I felt disappointed, but instead of letting their coldness bring me down, I made a decision. I would become independent as soon as possible. I saved every penny, lived carefully, and after a few years, I finally moved out on my own. Once I left, I kept my distance from my family. At first it felt strange, but over time I realized I was happier without them constantly bringing me down. Now that I was engaged, the idea of introducing both families made me uneasy. After years of barely speaking to my parents and sister, I wasn't sure how they would react. "It's okay," Ryan reassured me. "Just a simple chat. I don't want you to feel pressured, Patricia." Hearing his kind words, I decided maybe it was time to see them again. For the first time in years, I went back home to tell my family about my engagement. When I told them the news, my mother barely looked up. So what?" she muttered. I took a deep breath and tried again. "Ryan's family would like to meet you all." Mom groaned. "That sounds like a hassle. We're not free. There's no need for a family meeting." I expected this reaction, but it still hurt. I sighed, knowing I had no choice but to use the only method that ever worked with them. "Well," I said casually, "I was thinking of treating everyone to lunch at that fancy restaurant in town." At that moment, Helen, who had been lazily lying on the sofa, suddenly sat up. "Wait, what? That place has amazing food. I'm going." Hearing this, my parents' attitude changed immediately. "Oh, if Helen wants to go, then we'll go too." Just like that, they agreed to attend the family meeting, not because they cared about me, but because of the expensive meal. The day of the family gathering finally arrived. Ryan's parents greeted mine politely, but my family barely acknowledged them. They nodded slightly, but it was clear their minds were on something else: the food. While Ryan and his parents remained polite and mature, I could feel the awkwardness growing. I was nervous, afraid my family would embarrass me. As soon as the food arrived, my parents and Helen completely ignored everything else. "Wow, this looks amazing," my father said, eyes shining. "It smells incredible," my mother added. Helen, too, was busy enjoying her meal, paying no attention to Ryan's family. They made no effort to start a real conversation, but the moment Ryan's parents mentioned Helen, everything changed. Their eyes lit up as they started talking nonstop. "Helen is our pride and joy," my mother gushed. "She was such a beautiful child, everyone adored her." Helen pretended to be embarrassed. "Oh, stop talking about the past," she said, laughing, but it was obvious she loved the attention. After the meal, my parents and Helen stood up quickly. "All right, we're leaving now," Mom said without a second thought. And just like that, they left in a hurry, as if they had only come for the free food. I sat there, ashamed and frustrated. Ryan and his parents were stunned. His mother was the first to speak. "It's even worse than I imagined," she said softly. I sighed. "I'm really sorry. I know they were terrible." Ryan reached for my hand. Patricia, this isn't your fault. In fact, I admire you. You've grown into a wonderful person despite all of this." His mother smiled warmly. "From now on, Patricia, you can think of us as your real parents." Hearing those words, I felt a warmth in my heart that I had never felt before. For the first time in my life, I realized I finally had a real family. I almost cried. We kept preparing for our wedding, but I was worried that my family might cause problems if we had a big wedding. So I talked to my in-laws and suggested a small wedding with only close family. After meeting my family at the introduction event, my in-laws quickly agreed. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Helen. She had never called me before, so I felt a little uneasy. "Hello? What's up?" I asked. "I've decided to get married too." "Huh?" "Oh, congratulations. I'm planning to introduce my fiancé. Come to our parents' house next Friday." Before I could say anything, Helen hung up. I had already planned a date with my fiancé that day. When I told him, he said, "It's okay. We can go after the meeting." So I decided to go quickly meet them and leave. When I saw Helen's fiancé at my parents' house, I disliked him immediately. "Wow, Helen was right. You really are plain and just a high school graduate, huh?" he said. I was shocked. This was the first time we met, yet he spoke to me like that. I had graduated from a well-known university and worked at a famous IT company, but he looked down on me just because I wasn't from an elite background like him. "He has no connection with an ordinary and useless person like you," he added. I couldn't stand being there anymore. I picked up my things and said, "I'm leaving now." Helen suddenly called out, "Wait, we're not done talking yet." "What else?" I asked. She smirked and said, "Our weddings ended up on the same day." "What? But since you're having a small wedding, it doesn't matter, right?" "You said it would only be for close family." "Wait a minute, that's true. But what about our parents and relatives?" "They will all be at my wedding," she said with a grin. "You'll have a sad little wedding with none of your family there." Helen had planned her wedding on the same day as mine on purpose just to mock me. She was truly awful, and my parents had agreed with her. I had enough. That was the moment I decided to cut ties with my family completely. When I told Ryan about it, he was shocked. Then he had an idea. "If your family won't come, why not invite lots of other people instead? There are still 3 months before the wedding. Even if we change the date, your parents won't come, and Helen just wants to make you feel small. Don't let her win," he said. His words made sense, and I felt determined to move forward without my toxic family. I suddenly remembered something about Ryan's father. "By the way, wasn't your father—" 3 months passed, and finally our wedding day arrived. Many people attended, including our friends, co-workers, and Ryan's relatives. At the start of the ceremony, we let everyone know that my family wasn't there. Everyone supported us and told me not to let my sister or parents bring me down. Because of their kindness, the wedding had a warm and happy atmosphere. After the wedding, the reception began, and the host was full of energy. Since so many people had come, our friends performed, and thanks to some connections, a professional musician played, making it an amazing celebration. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents, Helen, and her husband walk in. I quickly went toward them. They looked shocked as they watched the lively reception. When they saw me coming, they also walked toward me. "What is this?" Helen asked, confused. "Huh? What happened to your wedding?" "Were you curious because our reception is so much fun?" I said with a little smirk. Helen's face turned red with anger. "What do you mean? Were you supposed to have a small ceremony with only families?" "Actually, this wedding venue was a very popular and expensive place," I explained, which is why Helen had chosen the same venue as us, probably to mock me. "Why are there so many people at your reception?" she asked, looking around. "Well, our friends, co-workers, and my father-in-law's company employees are here," I explained. Helen's fiancé suddenly turned pale. "Wait, what? The groom's father's company employees? Then he looked around in shock. No way! Why are all the people I invited from the company here? Helen and her husband stood there, stunned. It turned out that the company employees who were originally supposed to attend Helen's wedding chose to come to ours instead because they actually worked for my father-in-law's company. You mean your father-in-law's employees? Helen's fiancé asked in disbelief. Yes, I replied. He just arrived at that moment. Helen's fiancé's face froze. The president? Why is he here? Well, my father-in-law said, stepping forward. It would be strange if a father didn't attend his son's wedding, though it seems like some parents here have a different way of thinking. He glanced at my parents, who looked embarrassed. Then he turned to Helen's fiancé and said, I heard you deliberately planned your wedding on the same day as my son's. What was your reasoning? Helen's fiancé immediately tried to shift the blame. I had no idea it was your son's wedding. Besides, it wasn't my idea, it was my wife's. She said she wanted to humiliate her own sister. Helen's eyes widened in shock. What? Why are you blaming everything on me? You also said it was fun to put down someone from a lowly high school background, you idiot. Stop talking, not in front of the president, her husband snapped. It's your fault for blaming me first, Helen shouted back, right in front of us. Helen and her fiancé started arguing like children. My father-in-law finally lost his patience. Enough already. This is Patricia and my son's important reception. Helen's fiancé panicked and ran out as if escaping. Helen, still in her wedding dress, hurried after him. And just like that, they disappeared from our wedding. We have always thought highly of you. Since we're already here, maybe we'll stay for the reception. My parents suddenly said. Helen's wedding reception had many empty seats because all of the groom's work colleagues had canceled to attend ours. Naturally, Helen was upset, and even her friends and the groom's friends laughed at her, making her the center of the jokes. My parents, who were always so proud, looked embarrassed and angry. It seemed like their frustration made them want to salvage something from this mess by attending my wedding instead. We always knew Patricia was more reliable, they suddenly said. Hearing my parents praise me out of nowhere gave me chills. It's useless to say anything now, I replied. I've already decided to cut ties with you. Please leave. What? How dare you speak to your own parents like that? Because you're in the way. Leave now. At my request, the venue staff escorted my parents out. With the troublemakers gone, we continued enjoying our reception. The night was filled with happiness and laughter. Afterward, Helen and her fiancé broke off their engagement. After being humiliated at their wedding, their relationship fell apart. On top of that, since the groom had angered my father-in-law, who was also his boss, his chances of getting a promotion were completely ruined. Now they're caught up in a messy argument over who should pay the engagement cancellation fees. As for my parents, after being humiliated themselves, they turned their anger toward Helen. They had always spoiled her, but now they disowned her. I heard they were furious because they had spent around $80,000 on Helen's wedding, only for it to be canceled. Honestly, my parents and Helen are both hopeless, but since I've cut ties with them, their problems are no longer my concern. Right now, I'm enjoying a happy life as a newlywed. After returning from a wonderful honeymoon with my husband, he switched jobs to work at my father-in-law's company. He's working hard to take over the business, and I've become a housewife to support him, managing our home every day. We plan to continue supporting each other and living a happy life together. Story 2. This narrative has a title. My daughter-in-law insisted that I give her stepchildren my estate. She faced a harsh reality check in a lawsuit after I refused. Hello, everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Apologies are required for formatting on mobile devices. Additionally, discard for apparent reasons. I am 57 years old. I never imagined that I would be blogging here, but I just need to vent since the last few months have been a complete mess. Perhaps seek some guidance. Hold on tight because this is going to be a lengthy one. Since this is rather involved, let's start with some background information at the bottom. On the East Coast, I own a number of eateries. I don't mean to come across as boastful, but it's crucial to the plot. When I was 16, I began working as a dishwasher. For minimal wage, I'm working really hard. I was somewhat mentored by the chief chef. A special thanks to Tony, who taught me all there is to know about the industry and ripped my guy. I advanced to the position of line cook, then sous chef, and finally, head chef. I saved as much money as I could, occupied a subpar studio apartment, operated a dilapidated Honda that was more rust than vehicle, never went on vacation. At the age of 28, I finally opened my own place. There were around 8 tables in this small hole-in-the-wall establishment. Even though there were just a few steaks and spaghetti on the menu, everyone enjoyed it. Let's fast forward 30 years. My goodness, that makes me feel ancient. I currently own 15 restaurants and a massive catering company that caters to anything from high-end weddings to upscale business gatherings where everyone acts friendly. The familial stuff comes next. Married my first wife while she was young and had 2 amazing children, 28 women and 31 men. We didn't dislike each other or anything, but our marriage didn't work out. We just drifted apart after she relocated across the nation for a significant career opportunity. Continue to sometimes discuss the children. It's all civil. Remarried to Sarah, a wonderful woman, around 11 years ago. Clearly a fake name. She was. Man. It still aches to type this. 6 months have passed since her death. In just 3 months, fucking cancer moved from diagnosis to death. Extremely aggressive. Although she didn't have any children of her own, she was quite close to her sister's 3 children. After her sister got divorced and had to work 2 jobs, she practically reared them. 2 years ago, my son married a 30-something lady who had 2 children from her previous marriage, 10 boys and 8 girls. When they were very little, their father died. I believe it was a car accident. I suppose that should have been a warning sign because she never really discussed it much. Everything appeared wonderful at first, don't you think? The children were kind, referred to me as Grandpa almost immediately. My youngster appeared to enjoy her company, was always discussing how wonderful it was to have a true family once more. An aside on my son. He sells pharmaceuticals and earns a respectable $150,000 annually. He did, however, lose her job. Soon after their marriage, she worked as a real estate salesperson, said that she should concentrate on integrating the family or whatever they decide. Correct? Later on, this becomes significant. Looking back, I can see a lot of warning signs that I either missed or didn't want to see. For example, she showed a great deal of interest in my business right away. They kept asking me how many restaurants I owned, their values, and the terms of the catering contracts. You know, I simply assumed she was showing interest in the family company. At my house, she would attend these family meals. I enjoy preparing meals for my family. I like it. And somehow, she would constantly bring up money in discussion. For example, she would begin discussing the exorbitant expense of private schools nowadays. The exorbitant disay of Vonerv Ajachi College, or the challenges of saving for retirement as a single mother, which she no longer was, very subtle, like. Therefore, you couldn't really confront her about it. She continued saying strange things about inheritance, though, and that's what should have warned me. She would say things like, once we have access to the family money, or when we take over the restaurant business. Always really informal, but in hindsight it's clear what she was doing. But the kids were cool. Emma, her fictitious name, loves to cook, wanted to assist in the kitchen at all times, questioned everything and everything, Jake, her son. Fake names are also quieter. He's a good child, though. For them, the entire situation has been quite difficult. Since my daughter will play a significant role in the future, I suppose I should also address her. She is a compliance officer at this large bank. Very intelligent. Bullshit was always detectable from a distance. She kept my bargain to herself, although she never truly liked it, mostly because she witnessed her brother's happiness. Let's name her Karen, because that's exactly what she became, and that was approximately 6 months after my son married her. She became quite demanding about money, and not in a typical manner. For example, she inquired about your children's college funding, and then she did whatever the devil she was doing. For instance, one day she appeared at my main restaurant. The one downtown, which can accommodate around 200 people, is very popular. Throughout the whole presentation, she discussed how she might modernize the company. Remember that she has never had a job in a restaurant. She was discussing how we should put everything on avocado toast or something to appeal to millennials, and she had this folder full of Pinterest printouts. Smash. Here's the problem, though. She had obviously done her homework. She was fully aware of the property's value. It had just been assessed for insurance purposes, was aware of our agreements with large hotels for their events, even know about the plans for DC expansion that I was thinking about. Later, I discovered that she had been questioning my staff members and telling them she was now a part of the family company. She then launched this strange push to become more involved in the daily affairs, would attempt to access our accounting system, attend management meetings, and show up at odd times. She was helping me modernize things, I once told the bookkeeper. Finally, I got a call from my restaurant manager asking, "What's up with your dill?" The holidays were when the true insanity began. Every year at my house, we have this large family feast. I make all of the food myself. You know, it's kind of my thing. Just as I'm serving the main course at dinner, Karen arrives with these enormous binders filled with business concepts. I had spent about 3 days making duck confit. She goes on to say that she has been researching the field and that she ought to begin observing me in order to get knowledge of the business. Recall that my daughter is employed at a bank. I thought, why does Karen lose it? When you have no experience? Begins to weep, claiming that she is only attempting to ensure the future of her children and that we are denying her a place in the family legacy. But hold on, things will improve. She began frequently arriving at my residence without warning, as if I were experimenting in my own kitchen with fresh dishes. She always had an excuse up here, and I conduct all of my menu planning there. Wanted to deliver store-bought cookies that she had made. Once he was in the neighborhood, still had the price tag, or wanted to show me photos of the children. All right, I adore those children, but let's get to the truly strange bit. She began photographing everything, my workplace, my home, and my vehicles. Later, I discovered that she was recording all of my assets, like an odd stalker inventory of sorts. When she believed no one was watching, she even snapped photos of my mail. She then began discussing my late wife's relatives, extremely awkward inquiries concerning our prenuptial agreement and inheritance arrangements, attempting to determine whether her niece's nephews were receiving any assistance. Remember, my wife had recently died. As in, what the fuck? Who does that? When she attempted to persuade my head chef, who has been with me for 20 years, to give her copies of all our exclusive recipes, that was the tipping point for me. Informed him that she was preserving some BBS or family customs. Chef felt it was strange and phoned me right away. Man, thank God for devoted workers. Oh, and take this. She began introducing herself to everybody as the prospective proprietor of my eateries. One day, for example, my son contacted me, really bewildered, since one of his customers, you may recall that he sells pharmaceuticals, had complimented him on taking over the family business. He didn't know what they were discussing. My youngster was only complying with it the entire time. He would offer explanations such as, "She's just trying to fit in," or "She's just enthusiastic." In retrospect, I believe she was actively influencing him behind the scenes. "Your dad needs to retire soon, and we need to be prepared to take over," she had reportedly been telling him. I made several attempts to discuss it with him, but he would become quite defensive. Discovered later, she had persuaded him that I didn't trust him with the business and that I was driving him away. Complete manipulation techniques. All right, so this is where it all went haywire. I made the decision to amend my will 3 weeks ago. Nothing significant. Just your typical activities following the death of a spouse. Fuck cancer. Really? Met with my legal representative. Very kind man. However, I've been managing my business affairs for around 20 years. This is what I was altering. Most of my possessions, 4 million roughly, 2 million, going all the way to my bio kids. Some special items for the nieces and nephews of my late wife. Because she assisted me in growing the business, we included this clause in our prenuptial agreement. For each of my son's stepchildren, I even established these $50,000 education trust funds. Quite giving, isn't it? $50,000 apiece for children I've known for just 2 years? That weekend, my son comes over for supper. I told him about the modifications. As I was preparing this new scallop dish I've been working on. Completely typical dialogue. He asked if he might take a copy of the will summary home so he could review the specifics, even though he appeared to be okay with everything. Yes, anything. Didn't give it much thought. A huge error. 9 p.m. Tuesday evening. I'm watching Yellowstone while seated in my favorite recliner. Whatever you think, Kevin Costner is a national treasure. I'm wearing this vintage Kiss, the chef apron and my tattered trousers. I was a joke from my late wife. All of a sudden I hear someone beating on my door as if they were attempting to smash it. Karen is here. She is physically trembling and her face is flushed. Rudely pushes by me and enters the home, then begins to rant about how unjust everything is. I would yell that I'm treating her children unfairly and that I should divide it evenly among all of the grandchildren. I'm attempting to soothe her. Tell the step-grandchildren that $50,000 apiece for college is a really decent deal. She won't accept it, even if I hardly understand. Then she lets it all out. I'm expecting a child. Additionally, you will never see your grandchild if you don't amend your will to divide everything evenly. Never. I'll see to that. Yes. Although she had been making insinuations about being pregnant, this was the first concrete proof. Here's the problem, though. It didn't appear to thrill her. For example, who poses a threat when they reveal they are pregnant? She has this smug expression on her face and begins to spell out her demands, so I must have looked astonished. Yes, literal requirements. She desired that all of the grandchildren have an equal share of everything, her too, as well as my daughters. Although the beach home isn't even a part of the estate, her name was added to the Restaurants Incorporation documents as the succeeding owner. For my children, it is in a trust, authority over all education trust funds, something to do with voting stock in the company. ISTG, the lady watches too much Succession. Definitely not, I tell her. She breaks down in tears and accuses me of playing favorites and ruining the family. She then shows me that she has been filming the entire chat on her phone. She threatens to make sure everyone knows how I truly regard family if I disagree. I just kind of lost it. I told her to leave my residence immediately. All she's saying is that she'll make me regret this, and that lawyers and prejudice are to blame. In the meantime, I'm thinking what happened to my peaceful Tuesday night as I stand there in this dumb apron. I called my son right away. He sounded strange, as if he had anticipated this. Said that the will had been causing Karen's distress all week. Tried to persuade me to change my mind by stating things like, "We need to think about all the kids," and "She's just being protective." He then detonates yet another explosive. If he doesn't support her, she has been threatening to move back to her hometown with the kids. At this time, my sons have essentially adopted those children, adores them as though they were his own. It's incredibly horrible that she's using them as leverage. The following day was considerably worse. She supposedly went on a manic Facebook tirade about inheritance discrimination and poisonous privileged families. Does that even exist? Tagged a number of my business partners and other people. I'm grateful that my social media specialist saw it quickly and fixed the harm. But hold on. There's more. That afternoon, I get a call from my daughter. As it happens, Karen had been phoning all of our family members to inform them that I was writing her children out of the will. To begin with, they were never involved, and attempting to win others over to her cause. The worst thing? In fact, several individuals purchased her BS. God tells me via 3 separate relatives that I should accept contemporary family dynamics and consider the children. Like, I hadn't already considered the children who will benefit from those college dollars. Thus, following the entire incident, everything became calm. Karen stopped phoning and ceased making unexpected appearances, even become quite kind during family get-togethers. Completely different from the yelling banshee who attempted to use her pregnancy as a kind of blackmail. I should have realized something wasn't right. Brief history. My house started losing certain items about 8 months ago. At first, nothing significant. From my recipe box, a couple family recipes vanished. 35 years of secrets gathered. Unreplaceable items. Some pricey wine disappeared. Inexplicably, my late wife's old business files were rearranged. I thus took the sensible course of action, installed security cameras. Nothing extraordinary, a simple ring arrangement. In addition, my home office has a couple additional cameras. For insurance purposes, I told everyone they were. The reason for the wine collecting. At the time, Karen really chuckled about it, said I was being suspicious. Who do you think is laughing now? We tried to keep things regular for the kids during our large family meal last Sunday. Dessert plating is what I'm doing in the kitchen. I've been honing my chocolate souffle for the new menu. Karen excuses herself so she may go upstairs to the restroom. It's 15 minutes later. 20 minutes. My daughter looks at me like, what the fuck? We're attempting to be courteous, though. After half an hour, I check my phone and voila. I get a security alert from my office at home. I can really see this woman searching through my file drawers. I'm not even attempting to be subtle. She's carrying about this little pen scanner. Discovered later, she's simply going through everything with her portable document scanner. All of my property documents, bank statements, and company contracts. The finest part, though, comes after. I said before that she has been strangely kind recently. She had been preparing this for weeks, it turned out. She tested which drawers were locked, looked at sightlines from the corridor, and even timed how long it took for anyone to notice her using the restroom, according to CCTV footage from earlier trips. As she hits the bottom drawer, I'm trying to determine what to do while watching everything unfold on my phone. I store the phony paperwork there. Yes, you read correctly. You see, I started storing all of my crucial documents in a bank safety deposit box once things began to disappear. What's in my workplace at home? Fake summaries, out-of-date copies, and some intriguing but untrue notes on impending corporate changes. She scanned this fictitious paper about my plans to franchise restaurants that I would never open, and another about prospective purchasers for the business that had entirely fictitious numbers for nearly 10 minutes. She eventually returns downstairs, looking naive and apologetic for feeling ill. She attempted to enter my secured desk after the filing cabinets, and as a result, my phone is exploding with security warnings. But hold on, things will improve. While all of this is taking place, remember how my daughter works at a bank? Their fraud section sent her this strange notice. It turns out that Karen used fake paperwork signed by me in an attempt to create trust accounts for her children. In fact, she attempted to defraud a bank. In essence, the documents she attempted to employ were fictitious revisions to my will that claimed I had consented to divide everything evenly among all of my grandchildren. She had even falsified the signature of my lawyer. Like, none of this operates that way. I almost had a stroke when my daughter handed me the fake paperwork. It wasn't even close to my signature. Pro tip: before committing crimes, try forging. She also mispronounced my lawyer's name. Here's the truly odd part. It's Stevens with a V, not Stevens with a PH. She was pregnant when she did all of this. As if you're out here doing several felonies while you're actually carrying my grandchild. Make sense of it. I had all of the locks in the house changed by a locksmith the following day. I have mounted one of those keypad devices on the entrance of my home office. When Karen learned that she could no longer just go in whenever she wanted, she lost her temper. I started weeping and said that I was pushing her away because I didn't trust my family. You just attempted to commit fraud and take my paperwork, lady. Nowadays, trust isn't really a factor. I am working on inventory at my downtown restaurant the day after the security camera incident. I still do it myself, yes. Old habits don't go away easily. My friend Mark, who owns this upscale establishment across town, has called. Together we grew up on the field. I've known him for ages. You're not going to believe who just tried to enlist me in some scam, Mark says. It turned out that Karen and a few of her pals had lunch at his restaurant. She was unaware that Mark knew who I was. We don't disclose our friendship because of the politics of the restaurant business. For example, she is sitting at his restaurant at 2 p.m., sipping expensive drinks, and openly talking her friends about her scheme to take over my restaurants. Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing, so he captured the entire event on his phone. In fact, this mother was boasting about how she would ensure her children's legacy. Straightforward quotation. My children will own those eateries by the time I'm finished. No, not his pampered brats. She even offered Mark a management role after she took control in an attempt to get him to assist her in contesting the will. This is when things become very gloomy, though. In the midst of all of this, my kid at last developed a backbone and began conducting his own research. In their home office, he discovered this journal. It's not a diary. You guys, this was a full-on planning paper. Since before they were married, this woman had been preparing for this. The diary included valuable notes regarding my buildings and assets, as well as research on my restaurants. Real timetable for family relationship manipulation, lists of the family members she may consult, information about her pregnancy. She used it to blackmail me weeks before she knew about it. There are several ways to coerce me into altering my will. She even included a spooky section in which she examined how my late wife's passing left me emotionally exposed. Who does that? It gets worse. But my son was distraught. He made the decision to speak with the lawyer for her late husband's family. Say that 5 times quickly. It was out that following the death of her first spouse, she had committed the same fraud with them. Unless his family granted her a larger share of their family trust, she threatened to deny the grandchild access. They worked with their attorneys to document everything, but they ultimately reached a private settlement to continue seeing the children. The fraud department at my daughter's bank is investigating the phony documents Karen attempted to use. In the meanwhile, they discovered proof that she had attempted the same scam in 2 other states. This was her entire business plan. Mary extorts wealthy men and their families. The actual kicker. In secret, she had been recording every conversation in our household. On her phone, my son discovered hours and hours of recordings. In an attempt to get someone to say anything that she might use as leverage, she would videotape everything. But she made a huge mistake. Because it is extremely unlawful in our state to record conversations without authorization, similar to a felony. After then, we learned about the pregnancy. Do you recall how she threatened me with that? She had been aware of it for approximately 6 weeks before to the will drama, according to her journal. She really held off on making the announcement until she had the opportunity to use it as leverage. In her journal, she wrote about it. The announcement should be timed for maximum effect. Who schedules the announcement of their pregnancy around chances for black men? This is insane on the level of a soap opera. When my son eventually started digging into their money, he discovered that she had spent around $3,000 consulting with several estate lawyers in an attempt to find someone who would assist her challenge my will. Because, her assertions were wholly false, the majority of them rejected her. Oh, and she discovered scanned versions of those lost family recipes in her inbox. In actuality, she was attempting to sell them to a rival restaurant chain. Some of those recipes are older than she is. FFS. The icing on the cake. Karen openly acknowledges that she married him, in part because of my business, in emails that my son discovered between her and this dubious legal expert. She stated, and I quote, "His dad's restaurants are worth millions. They can't disregard my claims to the company if I have his child." Before it was ever conceived, she was already preparing to use my grandchild as a negotiating chip. Let it sink in. We met with my lawyer as a family after locating the diary and all the supporting documentation, and I mean just the true family when I say family, me, my children, and the sister of my late wife. According to the lawyer, we had enough for a restraining order because of the attempted theft and harassment. The bank fraud issue was also on a very other level, but we had to be smart about this. Karen was still unaware that we were well informed. She continued to creep about and attempt to be charming while carrying out her strange little ideas. So we took notes on everything. Every email, text message, each dubious action she took. Then she committed her greatest error to yet. Last Thursday, she shows up at my main restaurant during dinner rush. Like peak service. 200 people in the dining room. Kitchen going full speed. At 5 months pregnant, she has clearly been drinking and begins to cause a commotion. She's yelling that I'm ruining her family and taking away the future of her kids. While my boss rings, my poor hostess, a nice 19-year-old college student, tries to calm herself. She is threatening to report my illicit business activities to the health authorities when I arrive. She says she has evidence. I'm engaging in a variety of dubious activities involving health codes and taxes. I haven't been in business for 30 years, had no serious infractions. The finest part, though, comes after. She is filming herself doing this like full-on phone out live-streaming her tantrum to Facebook in a private company without authorization, providing additional proof to her unlawful recording accusations. My son shows up, LOL. He received a call from someone urging her to go. She lashes out at him, accusing him of betraying their family, and then she drops this bomb. "If you don't support me, I'll terminate this baby." Yes, while live broadcasting in the middle of a crowded restaurant, she used the fear of an abortion to manipulate them. That was the tipping point for my kid. He just shut down and made his own police call. That's right. While we await their arrival, she begins to damage everything. Knocked down a complete wine rack, damages of about $15,000, attempted to enter the kitchen in order to reveal our food store. Karen, it's all up to code. Police arrive, ask everyone to make a statement. Karen is still yelling about unlawful activities and exposes. She was arrested for attempted bribery of an officer in addition to being drunk and unruly. Against my advice, my son saved her the following morning, but whatever. Still his spouse. In a technical sense, we dropped the hammer at that point. With all the supporting documentation, my attorney wrote her a thorough stop and desist letter. My home's security footage, falsified bank documents, her illicit recordings, screenshots of her bizarre Facebook posts, evidence of her attempting to sell family recipes, journal entries, witness accounts of her threatening to abort the child, and records of her prior frauds with her late husband's family. After seeing our evidence package, her lawyer resigned and phoned us within an hour to inform us that they would no longer be defending her. Karen's answer, whole psychotic episode. She began sending out bulk texts to the entire family. These insane dangers. They're going to notify the IRS about me, but there's nothing to find. All right, I'll give the health department a call. Do it, please. We're immaculate. I'm going to reveal my bigotry against her children. Going to inform the local press I'm abusing her. LOL. Taking the infant and moving across the nation. I will ensure that my kid never again works in this place. Finally, my kid grew up and filed for an emergency custody hearing and divorce. His attorneys claim that she is incapable of making medical judgments about the pregnancy because of her taped threats to terminate the child as manipulation. After agreeing, the judge mandated that she leave their home and undergo a mental health assessment. Until the baby is born and custody is decided, she is only permitted to have supervised contact with my son. At the moment, she resides with her parents, who are remarkably understanding of the situation. They expressed regret to us and acknowledged that they had witnessed similar conduct during her last marriage, but they hoped she had moved on. If something occurs, I'll keep you folks informed. Edit. I apologize for any errors in this post, which I wrote from the restaurant in between shifts. Second edit. We're filing charges, yes. All of them. Third edit. Everyone is inquiring about my son. He is getting well and attending treatment. I'm currently living with my kid. Thank God. Edit. Had insurance for the wine she ruined. The last section will be available tomorrow. Await her response to the criminal accusations. At my restaurant, TLDR Dill had a breakdown. Manipulated by threatening to terminate the child. Was convicted of several offenses and is currently dealing with severe legal repercussions. The last update. Reddit, hello. After a crazy few months since my previous post, I can now finally tell you how things worked out. Get a drink. This is going to be a lengthy one, so I definitely needed one. To begin with, my grandson was born in good health. The baby boy weighs 7 pounds 2 ounces. I'm getting ahead of myself, but Karen had to give delivery while wearing an ankle monitor. LOL. The court proceedings proceeded quickly after all that transpired at the restaurant, like far more quickly than everyone anticipated. It turns out that the courts don't play around when you have video proof of someone committing many offenses. The criminal accusations were rather serious. Attempted grand theft, many forgery counts, theft of identity, criminal deception, recording that is illegal, breaking and entering from the office on several occasions, event, an officer was attempted to be bribed, plus several minor fees. Like her fourth lawyer by now, the new one attempted to use the pregnant mother as a stress card. After they played the audio of her threatening to terminate the baby as manipulation, Judge was not having any of it. The pattern of behavior issue piqued the interest of the DA's office. In addition to her late husband's family, they discovered 2 more families she had attempted similar fraud on. It seems that she had attempted the same inheritance plan twice previously, but the family reached a private settlement. Her marriage counselor was interviewed as part of the inquiry. A few months ago, my son had demanded couples therapy. Normally, that information is confidential, but due to the fraud pattern, the court permitted it. As it happens, she openly acknowledged in therapy that she uses pregnancy and having kids as negotiating chips. Who would say that to a therapist, for example? However, as they began looking into her background, the true karma struck. Do you recall how she said her first spouse perished in a vehicle accident? Yeah, it wasn't the complete thing. He was insured for life. Additionally, there were some very dubious circumstances surrounding his death, even though she was not charged with anything. Although they had a suspicion, his family was never able to confirm it. The court case was a complete shambles. In an attempt to defend herself, she continued firing her attorneys. Pro tip, don't. And leveling these absurd charges on my business methods. She once attempted to accuse me of operating a narcotics ring through my eateries. Like, girl, I can barely manage my iPhone, let alone run a drug empire, haha. Her attempt to provide the court with those fictitious documents, alleging my unlawful business operations, was the last straw. She had used letterhead from a bank that no longer even exists, and they were clearly fake. This is a true criminal mastermind, people. Last week, sentencing was announced. 18 months behind bars, all but 90 days suspended, 5 years probation, required mental treatment, cannot serve in a fiduciary or financial role, has to pay back all the legal expenses, order of restraint, keeping her out of my company. Plus, she lost her notary license, which explains some of the awful forgeries, frankly. The custody and divorce proceedings were considerably more harsh. The baby's main physical custody was granted to my son. She visits one of such specific institutions twice a week under supervision. In fact, her parents are assisting her greatly with this. There is done with her sons, as we are for her elder kids, my ex-step-grandkids. Since they are not his biological children and were not married long enough to be adopted, the court was unable to grant my son any legal rights. However, because the children bonded with him, their maternal grandparents are assisting in setting up visits. They're decent folks. Like everyone else, they were appalled by their daughter's actions. I maintained the education trust for her kids in place, but locked them down hard. Funds from corporate trustees are sent directly to the schools. She's unable to touch any money. Their mother's insanity shouldn't lead those children to suffer. The fallout has been intriguing. Many of the family members who first supported her have been phoning to express regret. Thank God, my son is in therapy and is staying at one of my rental properties while he works on his recovery. Despite everything, my daughter has been fantastic, helped with all the legal, financial matters, and supports her brother. In the county jail, Karen is serving her 90-day sentence. Her older children are temporarily under the guardianship of her parents. Surprisingly, her parents are very supportive of my son having primary custody, and he loves being a father to the child. They must have witnessed enough of their daughter's actions to realize that it's best for her. The eateries are doing very well. An insane dill breakdown during dinner service turns out to be wonderful publicity. We've been booked solid for weeks. Figure it out. Last words? Keep a record of everything. Trust your intuition and maybe undertake stronger background checks before admitting someone into the family company. Edit. Thank you for all the accolades, but consider making a donation to charities that support single parents instead. Second edit. Yes, all the lost recipes have been retrieved. I won't share them yet, though. Third edit. Stop asking whether I'm hiring, but also, yes, we're always looking for good line cooks. Edit 4. My son asked me to add, maybe don't ignore that red flag if your spouse starts gathering evidence about your family's assets. TLDR, Dill was imprisoned. Son got custody of the baby. The restaurants are doing better than ever, and her elder children are staying with their grandparents. Karma is effective sometimes. Story 3. Hello, this is Amy. I'm just a regular college student, but I have a tale to share, one that continues to keep me up at night, occasionally. But I must take you back to the beginning in order to truly comprehend how everything went wrong. When we lost Dad, I was 14. My sister was just 9 years old. It went by so quickly. He was on his way home from work 1 minute. The next day, we received a call regarding a vehicle collision. He was struck by a drunk motorist who had run a red light. His wounds were simply too great, but he managed to survive for 3 days in the hospital. Mom was distraught when Dad passed away. I recall her telling them she would never get married again while sitting in the living room of her father's parents' house, tears running down her cheeks. No other man will ever be like John. Throughout it all, my grandparents, Dad's parents, were incredible. They made sure we had everything we needed and allowed us to stay in their home. Mom was not even required to work. To care for us, they sent her money each month. However, that's when things with Mom started to change. She treated my sister and me differently, and while it was subtle at first, it became obvious over time. For example, my sister would buy 5 new clothes every time we went shopping for school supplies. She would always give my sister the larger piece of chicken or the last cookie, while I would be told to make do with last year's clothes or a dinner. The worst time was Christmas. My sister would receive a ton of gifts, but I would only receive 1 or 2. Can I play in the school band, Mom? I was eager to learn how to play the flute, so I asked once. Oh, honey, she said, we simply cannot afford to rent an instrument at this time. However, my sister mentioned wanting to take dance classes the very next week, and my mother signed her up right away. Naturally. We must develop your talent, sweetie. Even in little ways, as when we both ask for homework assistance. Mom would drop everything to help my sister while telling me to figure it out on my own. Or when we'd both achieve something at school, my sister would get taken out for ice cream for getting a B, while my straight A's barely got a good job. The weird thing was, I learned to live with it. Maybe because my sister was so different from Mom, she'd always try to share her new things with me, or stick up for me when she could. That's what made it bearable. I guess knowing that even if Mom played favorites, my sister never did. We stayed close despite everything. I loved watching her practice her dance routines, and she'd sit and listen to me play the cheap plastic recorder I bought with my allowance money, since I couldn't join band. We were a team, me and her. No matter what Mom did or said, I was 16 when my sister turned 11. And that's when everything changed again. What started as routine blood work during a regular checkup turned into our worst nightmare. Sarah was diagnosed with kidney failure. I still remember sitting in the sterile hospital waiting room while the doctor explained everything to Mom. The words felt like they were coming from underwater. Chronic kidney disease treatment options, long-term care plans. Sarah, my vibrant little sister who loved to dance and could make anyone smile, was suddenly a patient. The diagnosis drew us even closer together. While Mom spent hours researching remedies and talking to physicians, I'd sit with Sarah during her sessions playing card games and making up crazy stories to divert her. We'd laugh together about the dreadful hospital food and make plans for all the things we do. Once she felt better, Mom scarcely knew I was there. She'd spend hours discussing Sarah's care with the physicians, completely forgetting I was in the room. When she did acknowledge me, it was typically only to send me to fetch something for Sarah or to tell me to be quieter. But I understood. Sarah was unwell. She needed the attention more than I did. Before I knew it, I was 18 and finishing high school. My scores were strong enough to secure me a partial scholarship to a college in another state. Once more, my grandparents stepped in and offered to pay the remaining balance of my tuition and other costs. Mom was just about to attend the event. Sarah had a doctor's appointment that morning, so she was running late. Not even for photos did she remain. Sarah is rushing off to another appointment. I couldn't blame her, though. First and foremost was Sarah's health. It was like entering a different planet in college. All of a sudden, the family turmoil was hundreds of miles away from me, taking engaging classes, meeting new people, and at last, feeling like I could breathe. I frequently contacted my grandparents and Sarah to tell them about my academics and college life. As Grandma and Grandpa kept me informed about everything going on at home, Sarah would share her treatments and feelings with me. When Mom did call, it was seldom. Usually, it was to remind me to contact my sister more frequently or to update me on Sarah's most recent test results. It was okay that she never inquired about my academics or how I was doing. By now, I was accustomed to it. Everything came apart in the midst of my junior year. My mother's number was flashing on the screen when my phone phoned shortly after midnight. I felt sick to my stomach. Amy, she never called so late. Her voice was hysterical and raw. Sarah is in the medical facility. Her kidneys. They've failed miserably. She is receiving hemodialysis. Through the phone, I could hear her sobbing. It's time for you to return home. The following morning was a haze of hurried packing and emails to lecturers. I was able to secure approval for a leave of absence and purchase a train ticket back home. The scenery hurried by my window. Sarah waiting for me to return home in a hospital bed was all I could think about. At the train station, Mom was pacing the platform in anticipation of my arrival. She appeared to have gone days without sleep. Her clothing were crumpled, her hair was disheveled, and her eyes had heavy bags under them. She took hold of my arm as soon as she noticed me and began dragging me in the direction of the parking lot. Mom's incessant speech on Sarah's illness occupied the whole car trip home, how much weight she had lost and how pale she seemed during the surgeries, how the drugs caused her to feel sick, making it difficult for her to eat, how her arms were bruised by the needles. Every detail made my stomach turn like a dagger. With her knuckles white on the steering wheel, Mom continued to exclaim, "She's so weak, Amy. My kid is going through a lot of pain. Hemodialysis isn't a cure, but it's keeping her alive. A genuine kidney is what she needs. She must." As soon as we arrived into our driveway, Mom was silent. She did not exit the vehicle, but she did switch off the engine. Rather, she looked at me, and I saw a shift in her countenance. Something colder and tougher took the place of the weeping, anxious expression. She responded, abruptly firm and demanding. "You can save her. You have to donate your kidney to her." I sat still. I wasn't surprised by the proposal. Naturally, I had given the idea of becoming a donor some thought. It was the way she said it, like if she were telling me to give her mother something. Carefully, I said, "What about the risks? How would my health fare if I—" She interrupted me, laughing harshly. "Sarah's life and well-being are more significant than your own. In a situation like this, how can you even think about yourself?" Her remarks struck me like a physical blow with their brutality. I was having trouble breathing, unable to think. Tears were already pouring down my cheeks as I staggered out of the car and dashed inside. I heard my mother yelling behind me. I threw myself into the bed after locking myself in my former bedroom. I sobbed all night long, smothering my cries in my pillow to keep my mother from hearing and shouting at me. My head was full with questions. Was there anything I could do? If I refused, what would happen to Sarah? If I answered yes, what would happen to me? If I didn't, would Mom ever forgive me? Mom was sipping her coffee at the kitchen table quietly, as if nothing had occurred, when I eventually came down for breakfast the following morning. "We need to have you checked as quickly as possible to make sure you're an eligible donor," she remarked, looking up when I stepped in. "To make the appointment, I'll give the hospital a call today." I held my coffee mug hard while I tried to speak clearly. "I haven't made up my mind to donate my kidney to Sarah yet, Mom." After a little period of stillness, Mom lost it. Hot coffee splattered across the table when she slammed her coffee mug down. "You haven't made up your mind," she cried. Her face is flushed. "What needs to be decided? Your sister is in critical condition." She got up, her chair scraping the floor, and I winced. "Don't you, Mommy, please, you heartless, self-centered girl." Now she was pacing and making wild gestures. "Do you wish to murder your sister to get all the attention for yourself? You want her to die." From the counter, she picked up a dish and tossed it into the sink. I jumped at the sound of porcelain breaking. "Because you are too self-centered to assist your sister, you will kill her." It was more than I could handle. I was barely able to function because my hands were shaking so much. However, I made it to my room by running upstairs somehow. I grabbed my still-packed suitcase and stuffed in a few more things from my dresser, while Mom continued screaming from downstairs, "Come back here! We're not done discussing this." However, I was finished. I dashed out the front door, past my furious mother, and down the stairs. She was still screaming about how self-centered I was, how I was killing my sister, and how I was a terrible daughter, and I could hear her following me. I simply ran until her voice was no longer audible. The distance to my grandparents' house was just a few blocks. I didn't even finish knocking before Grandma opened the door. "My dear, what's the matter?" I started crying again, and she drew me into an embrace. Grandpa looked over her shoulder with a worried expression. They seated me in their comfortable living room, where our family had shared many joyous times. Grandma prepared hot cocoa. She used to prepare genuine hot chocolate with melted chocolate and warm milk when I was a child, but not the instant sort. Hands shook and wept as they encircled the hot cup. I let them in on my mother's request for my kidney. When I told her that I needed time to consider, she became angry and shouted terrible things. "Of course we knew about Sarah's illness," Grandpa answered quietly. "We've been assisting with her medical expenditures. But this," he gave a headshake. "My dear," Grandma grasped my hand. "This needs to be your decision. Nobody, not even your mother, has the right to expect something like this from you. It's your body, your decision." My phone kept ringing in my pocket. Mom's name appeared on the screen over and over. Get tested promptly. You're needed by your sister. Quit being so self-centered. It's unbelievable that you're harming your own sister-like way. The following morning, I switched off my phone. We heard the front door crash open while we were eating breakfast. Mom stormed like a hurricane into the dining room. Her eyes were ablaze, her hair wailing. "You're on your way home now." She pointed at me and demanded, "To get you tested, we're heading to the hospital. She is also your daughter." Grandma wrapped her arm over my shoulders and said that, "Even for Sarah's sake, you cannot make her give up a kidney." "Hell no, I can't." The tone of Mom's voice became more hysterical. "She must do it. What if she doesn't?" Her eyes were steely and frigid as she turned to face me. "You're dead to me if you don't do this. You get it? You will no longer be my daughter." She whirled around and rushed out before anybody could react, slamming the door so forcefully that it rocked Grandma's china cabinet. The abrupt hush was broken by the sound of her car's tires squealing on the pavement and the engine roaring. I made the decision to pay Sarah a visit in the hospital that afternoon. Before escorting me to Sarah's room, the station nurse made me wash my hands well and gave me a medical mask. It was like entering a different universe when you walked into that immaculate hospital room. The air was filled with the constant beep of monitors, and my sister appeared to be connected to every machine in the world by tubes. Sarah's face brightened up when she saw me, even though she seemed so tiny in that large hospital bed. "Amy." Her grin was as dazzling as ever, but her voice was feeble. "You arrived." In order to avoid disturbing any of the cables or tubes, I sat carefully on the chair next to her bed. "I came squirt, of course. Make sure you're not making the nurses nuts, someone." For a long time, we sat there discussing everything and nothing. The awful hospital meals, my college classes, and her favorite nurse. Then, her face became serious. Mom informed me. "I would like to ask you to be my donor," she added gently. My throat constricted. "Sarah." "Listen, Mel." She made a move from my hand. Her fingertips felt icy against mine. "You would never be asked to do it by me, Amy. It must be your decision. Just yours." I clasped her hand while tears filled my eyes. While my mother was at home yelling at me for being selfish, here she was, hooked up to machines, battling for her life, and still worrying about how I felt. Sarah was defending my freedom of choice, gazing at her, laying there, both courageous and ill. I made up my mind. I'd want to be tested. I asked whether I could assist, not because my mother was pressuring me. It was as though the previous several days had never occurred when my mother learned that I had chosen to get tested. "You're doing the right thing, Amy," she said, as she hurried to give me a hug while weeping. The appropriate action. After returning home from my grandparents' place, I spent the following few weeks undergoing one test after another. Psychological testing, tissue typing, and blood samples. The process. Mom made my favorite meals and inquired about my day, and she was suddenly quite kind. In some respects, it was worse than having the mother I'd always desired. The doctor finally called us in to go over the results, after what seemed like an eternity of waiting. In his office, Mom and I sat with test results and documents piled high on the desk between us. He looked uneasy as he adjusted his spectacles. "Regretfully, I have some shocking news." He started to shuffle the papers. "These tests indicate that Amy is not a suitable donor for Sarah." Mom bent over. "What? Why not? We can do further testing. More exams aren't the point." Gently, the doctor intervened. "Well, the degree of relation between Amy and Sarah is the problem. It isn't enough for a transplant." In the doctor's office, I sat there attempting to understand what he was saying. There was a minor whirling sensation in the room. "I don't get it." "Slowly," I said. "What does degree of kinship imply to you specifically? Could you elaborate?" The physician cleared his throat. Mom and I looked at each other. Your blood work's genetic markers indicate that you and Sarah are not complete siblings. There is just one parent that you have in common." I glanced at my mother. Her hands were holding the armrests of her chair so hard that her knuckles matched her face, and she had turned absolutely white. "Mom!" My voice was hardly audible above a whisper. "What is he discussing? How can this be?" Her chair nearly toppled over as she sprang to her feet. "This is irrelevant. All of this is irrelevant. Before one of us can speak another word, we'll locate another donor." The office door slammed behind her as she ran out. After a little pause, the doctor resumed his calm speech. "Mitchell, miss, according to the tests, you and Sarah have separate dads. Even if you have the same mother, the man who reared you is not your sister's biological father." The words struck me like a punch to the body. "Different dads. My father is not the same as my sister's biological father. Mom had an affair and cheated on Dad, got married to my father and became pregnant with Sarah. It was a blur on the way home. I can't even recall getting into my car or driving through the streets I know. Mom was seated at the kitchen table when I first arrived home. In front of her was a half-empty glass and a bottle of cognac. We must speak." My voice trembled as I spoke. "About the way you betrayed your father, regarding your betrayal of him." Without even glancing at me, she took another gulp from her glass. "You have no business about it. What difference does it make now, anyway? You are of no use. Not even your sister can be helped." I gaped at her in shock. "My father was my business, Dad. You also betrayed him. You were pregnant with Sarah after having an affair. You are solely to blame for this. If you weren't unfaithful, I could have assisted Sarah if we shared a father." The kitchen reverberated with the sound of the smack. Mom had moved before I even realized it. My cheek stung where her palm had slapped me, and I remained still, watching as she rushed up the stairs to my room. Shortly after, she returned with my bag, which I had just begun to unpack after returning from my grandparents' house, and tossed it at my feet. "Leave now!" She let out a scream. The cognac made her sentences a little slurred. "Anyhow, I never loved you. You ought to have done it. You should have been the one who got sick. Not Sarah, my darling." As her words took hold, I stood there with my palms firmly pressed on my burning cheek. "Never showed me affection. It ought to have been me. I had always suspected the truth." Lastly, without a word, said out. I grabbed my bag. Even though Mom was still yelling, her words had lost all significance. I interrupted her as I stepped out the front door and shut it behind me. In the middle of the round. I ended up back to my grandparents' house with tears in my eyes. I was unable to speak when Granny answered the door this time. I just sobbed as I collapsed into her arms. Through hiccuping gasps, they seated me in the kitchen. I filled them in on everything, including the test results, Mom's affair, Sarah's lack of paternity, Mom's harsh remarks, and how she had ejected me. Grandpa sat still, his coffee going cold before him as Grandma's face hardened with every syllable. When I finished, the stillness in the kitchen was overwhelming. Grandma gripped the phone and stated firmly, "We'll handle this." First thing in the morning tomorrow, she also did. I was eating breakfast the next day when Grandma made the call, putting it on speaker so Grandpa could hear to Murray. "It's Ellen." Grandma spoke in an icy tone. "Gather your belongings. You must get out of the house." Through the speaker, Mom's voice crackled. "What? What are you discussing?" "We own that house," Grandma went on, "and you who have mistreated our granddaughter and betrayed our son, you have no right to live there anymore. It was simply one time." A cry emerged in Mom's voice. "An accident occurred. I adored John. Yes, I did. I also adore Amy. You must trust me. It was sufficient to do so once." Grandpa's voice was shaking with rage as he said, "This family was annihilated by one instance. Please." Mom was crying now. "Where shall we go? How is Sarah being treated? The cost of Sarah's care may be discontinued." Coldly, Grandma said. "She's not our grandchild after all," Grandma went on, even though I briefly felt my heart stop. "But we won't do it. We're not harsh like you, Marie. Since Sarah is an innocent kid in need of assistance, we will continue to cover her medical expenses. But you need to escape that house, get a job, and get a place of your own. You've been standing on your own 2 feet for a very long time." The next day, I went to visit Sarah in the hospital. She seemed even smaller than before, if that was possible. She smiled weakly at me as I entered. She murmured gently, "Hey, I suppose we now understand why you are unable to donate to me. Distinct fathers." Who would have guessed correctly? Pay attention to me. I gave her hand a squeeze. Between us, nothing has changed. I still consider you my sister. I still adore you too. Grandma and Grandpa will continue to assist with your care. We will locate a donor for you. Sarah, I swear. Really? She started crying, despite the fact that I'm not actually there. Really? I forcefully shut her off. Family is more than just blood. It has to do with love, and you're my sister, regardless of the results of any tests. 3 months have passed since everything went wrong. Even so, there are moments when it seems like years. Now that I'm back at college, I'm attempting to concentrate on my coursework and establish a normal life. The house is still occupied by Mom. Grandparents agreed to let her remain, not for her sake, but for Sarah's. To get to dialysis, she needs a ride. When I questioned their choice, Grandpa gave an explanation. And someone needs to be there when she's not feeling well. Sarah travels to the hemodialysis center 3 times a week. She's tough, but it's harsh on her physique. Even though I occasionally hear the weariness in her voice, she never complains when we speak on the phone, which we do virtually every day. However, everything changed last week. For the first time in months, Sarah sounded excited when she called me. "Amy!" She essentially yelled into the telephone. "They found a donor. The doctor just informed us there was this dude. He perished in an accident. However, he was an organ donor. And I'm a match." She was weeping now. Happy tears. "Amy, I'm getting a kidney. I might truly get better." I found myself crying to relief, washing over me like a wave. After everything we've gone through, finally some good news. I now make arrangements with our grandparents whenever I want to see Sarah. We spend time together when she visits their home. They're away from Mom. Grandma prepares us hot chocolate, the real kind still. Additionally, Sarah laughs so hard at Grandpa's awful jokes that she has to hold her gaze. They treat Sarah with such affection even though they know she's not their real grandchild. She's only a kid. I once told Grandma that she wasn't at fault for anything, but last week, when Sarah had left for home, they did take me aside. "We need to talk about something serious," Grandpa said, sitting me down in his study about our will. He raised his hand as I began to object. "You need to know this. Everything we own, including the house and our money. Amy, it's going to you. Only you." "However, Sarah," I began. "Sarah isn't our grandchild," Grandma said gently. "However, once it's yours, you can do whatever you want with it. If you want to share with your sister, you will have to decide that." What they were actually saying made sense to me. They were punishing Mom, not Sarah. Mom, speaking of her, gave me a call yesterday. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up Amy. She spoke in a tiny, uncertain voice. "I need your help. Could you? Are you able to speak with your grandparents? Request permission to occupy the house permanently. If you ask them, I know." "No." I spoke firmly. "Final. Please, Amy. Your mommy is me." I acknowledge that I made mistakes. I interrupted her. "You betrayed your father. You lied to everyone. For many years. You acted as though I didn't exist. I was never loved by you. That is untrue." I hung up the phone. Maybe eventually I'll forgive her. Perhaps one day. Her betrayal will no longer hurt as much. But not today. Today I'm concentrating on Sarah's forthcoming transplant, on my academic work, on creating a life free from my mother's decisions. Story 4. My story begins when I was 23 years old and living in the suburbs in my grandmother's former home. She'd left it to me when she passed away. My father's mother, a kind woman who always made sure I had everything I needed. The house wasn't new or fancy, but it was solid and well-maintained, sitting in a quiet neighborhood where you could actually hear birds singing in the morning. I'm Leslie, and back then, my life seemed pretty straightforward. I had a good job, my own home, and what I thought was a caring family, my mom, my stepfather, and my younger half-sister Piper, who had just turned 18. They lived in a more modern house, closer to the city, though they were still paying off a hefty mortgage. That would take them several more years to clean. Leslie. Can we talk, honey? My mom asked one Sunday afternoon when she came over for our weekly coffee. Your stepdad and I have been thinking, this is your home. It's precisely what we've always dreamt of. The quiet location, the garden space. Wondering where this was going, I nodded. I am also aware of how difficult it is for you to get to work from here, she continued. Our house is so much closer to your office. That's when she laid it out. Her wonderful idea to transfer dwellings. They would move into my grandmother's house, and I would take their place in the city home. I just need to keep paying their mortgage. Consider it, she urged, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. You'd save so much time on that commute. And the house is bigger, more modern. In addition, this is the kind of place your stepdad and I have always desired to call home. I considered it for a moment. She was not mistaken. Their home would cut my daily commute in half, and it was newer, with a more spacious kitchen. What about the paperwork? I inquired. Shouldn't we get something in writing? Mom dismissed it with a wave of her hand. Oh, sweetheart, we are related. Why waste money on lawyers? You know I'd never do anything to hurt you. And then the move came swiftly. I settled into my new apartment quickly enough. Every month, I faithfully sent Mom the mortgage payment, usually more than the required amount, because I wanted to help pay it off faster. I put money into fixing up the house too, replacing old appliances and giving several rooms a fresh makeover. For 4 years, that was our arrangement. I paid the mortgage without fail, frequently paying more when I could. Everything appeared to be ideal. I had a shorter commute, a modern home, and what I felt was a strong agreement with my family. It appeared to be just another business travel to the other state, 2 weeks of meetings, presentations, and hotel rooms. To be honest, I was excited to return home and sleep in my own bed. The last thing I expected was to find myself locked out of my life. It was a chilly evening when my Uber dropped me off. I wheeled my suitcase up the driveway, noticing something odd. The porch light was on and I could hear conversations inside. Weird, since I lived alone and definitely hadn't left any lights on. What on earth? I murmured, trying my key in the lock. It didn't fit. I tried again. Then again, my perplexity rising to worry as I realized the locks had been changed. I was on the verge of calling a locksmith. The door opened wide. Behind her, a tall man I recognized as her new husband was lounging on my couch with his feet up on my coffee table. Behind her, my sister Piper, now 22, was wearing my favorite fuzzy slippers and staring at me as if I were some unwelcome solicitor. "Oh, you've returned?" Piper smirked as he leaned against the doorframe. I wanted to wipe her face clean. "Your belongings are in the garage." I stood there, luggage still in hand, trying to grasp what I was hearing. My belongings. What are you discussing? This is my residence. No more. Even though our parents said they couldn't afford new school outfits for me, they always paid for her flawlessly manicured nails, which she checked out. Mom and Dad gave it to us as a wedding present. We're living here presently. There was a brief, sideways tilt to the planet. Are you insane? For the past 4 years, I have been making mortgage payments on this home. Yes, regarding that. Piper rolled her eyes, resembling her mother just before she dismissed someone's emotions. I'm not particularly bothered about that. She made a shooing motion with her hand, indicating that we were given the house by our parents. You need to go. Get off our property before we call the cops. I was standing on my own porch. Memories of homelessness suddenly began to resurface. Piper has always received preferential treatment, the most recent iPhone. Designer clothing and hand-me-downs were available to me while I was still using a flip phone. Her 16th birthday present was a brand new automobile. While I rode the bus, the high cost of tuition while I was a community college student. As my younger sister got ready to shut the door in my face, I stood there shaking with anger. What am I meant to do? She gave a shrug. It's not my issue. Obtain a hotel or accommodation. Don't return here, please. The door closed with a bang. From within, I heard laughing, my sister and her husband making themselves at home in the house I had spent 4 years paying for remodeling, making my own. I don't recall making my way back to my car on foot. The trip to our parents' place is not anything I recall, the home of my granny. In our trade, I had handed them that one. I kept thinking about how this pattern had always existed, the way Piper always got what she wanted, the special treatment, the favoritism. However, I was supposed to just handle it. However, this was not like the others. This was more than a new phone or a high-end purse. This was everything I had worked for, my life, my home. Ready for a brawl, I bounded up to my former residence. The garden was covered with lengthy shadows from the porch light. Prior to our switch, I tended for years. By the time I got to the door, my hand was already clenched into a fist, and I hammered it till it hurt. Mom, get out. We must discuss Piper's recent actions. I heard footsteps approaching the door, talking in whispers and movement inside, but the door remained closed. Leslie. The sound of my mother's voice, muffled but sufficiently distinct, entered the room. Leave. That couldn't have been heard correctly. What? Open the door, Mom. I was recently locked out of my house by Piper, the home for which I have been making mortgage payments for the past 4 years. That's not your house anymore. The voice of my stepfather came in. Furthermore, this is not your home. Now this is our home. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was tilting. What are you discussing? I live here. Grandma let me handle it. You must go. Mom's voice had the severe tone she used when she felt she was being sensible. Go for a place to rent an apartment. Stop going from house to house, making everyone scared. I tried to stabilize myself by pressing my palms firmly on the door. Causing you anxiety? Do you mean me? I've been kicked out of my house by you. The house I've been paying for is occupied by Piper. You won't even let me in to discuss it now. This house is a big investment for us. Mom retaliated. We have made improvements and renovations. And what about all the money I spent sprucing up your house? I didn't care what the neighbors thought. I was shouting now. The 4 years of mortgage payments, the renovated bathroom, and the new appliances. That's not the same. Different? How? What's different? Mom, have you not planned this all along? While you were living in my home, get me to pay your mortgage. Then give Piper my place and keep the house at Grandma's for yourself. Real good plan. While you all split up my possessions, leave me destitute. A pause occurred. Then Mom's voice returned, harsh and icy. Leslie, you have to go immediately. We don't want to hear that because this is our home. For years of mortgage payments, innumerable house renovations, and a lifetime of witnessing Piper achieve her goals. Something broke inside of me. It all crystallized into a single clear thought. You're mistaken about one thing, Mama, I remarked, my voice suddenly calm. I live here. The deed is still in my name legally. Grandma let me handle it, remember? And since you enjoy evicting people from their homes so much, perhaps it's time I did the same. You wouldn't risk it, my stepfather snarled. Try me, I fired back. I've had enough of playing the nice guy. I'm tired of seeing you take advantage of me while favoring Piper. I'll have you officially evicted if you don't leave my house. Behind the door, there was silence. I turned and left after waiting a moment longer. I had nowhere to go, but I knew what I had to do. I was checking into a budget hostel 1 hour later. My business trip suitcase is still packed. I pulled out my phone and started searching for lawyers. Mr. Thompson, the attorney I hired, didn't play around. Within 2 days, he had drafted all the appropriate eviction paperwork. He rapped sharply and professionally on the door as I stood behind him on my porch. When Mom opened it this time and saw the legal documents in Mr. Thompson's hand, her face went white. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he began in a clear, professional voice. "I'm here on behalf of Leslie, your daughter, who is the property's legitimate owner. I'm serving you with an eviction notice. This is not possible." Behind Mom, my stepfather emerged, his face flushed with rage. Mr. Thompson remained unmoved. "Actually, we can. We are too. You've got 3 days to leave the property. If you fail to comply, we'll have to call the police and take legal proceedings to expel them forcibly." I stood calmly watching my mother's face cycle between disbelief, rage, and eventually terror. She attempted to capture my sight, but I turned away. I had had enough of her trickery. She tried, her voice sugary sweet. "Leslie, honey, we can discuss this. The time for talking was before you locked me out of my house and gave it to Piper." "Mom," I interrupted her, "for 3 days. You only get that? The longest 3 days of my life were those 3 days. Every time my phone rang, I jumped while I was at my hostel. Surprisingly, though, they did comply. On the morning of the 4th day, Mr. Thompson called to advise me that my parents had moved out and the home was clear. When I arrived, they were packing the last of their things into a moving vehicle. Mom's red-rimmed eyes watched me from the driveway. She hissed, tears running down her cheeks. "You're no daughter of mine. You are a traitor, following everything that we have done for you." "Done for me?" I gave a sour laugh. "You mean exploiting me to pay your mortgage for 4 years while you plot to take my house? Yes, I appreciate that." Without saying another word, she climbed into their vehicle and I watched them go for whatever rental they had found. The driveway was abruptly deserted as the moving van trailed behind. I had my house back. I discovered pandemonium inside. Things scattered, doors left open, but nothing significant. Damaged. A clear thought came to me as I stood in my living room, my grandmother's living room. I had paid off their mortgage. As soon as they locked me out of the house, they violated our verbal agreement. I had to pay for it. They might now face the repercussions. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt my grandmother's presence as I sat down in her old rocking rocker. I grinned. I kept thinking about the money I had spent on the bathroom remodel, the pricey water heater, the kitchen items, and the milk at my parents' house. I constantly sent more than was necessary because I thought I was doing something wise for my future, and I treated that house as though it were truly mine, expecting that one day the mortgage would be the true smack in the teeth. My calculations showed that just around $50,000 remained to be paid off. The house would have been paid for in full in 2 more years if I had continued to make payments at my current pace. I had been very near. I muttered to the empty chamber, "All that money, all those additional payments." Suddenly, a memory that I had previously dismissed came flooding back to me in a completely different way. We had just completed the house swap. Mom had been seated at her new kitchen table, stirring her coffee with that innocent face she usually had when she wanted something. "Leslie, honey," she'd murmured, "I've been contemplating. Perhaps you should simply give us the house deed, because we currently reside here. Make it official, you know. After the mortgage is paid off, we will give you the keys to our home, naturally." I recalled how rationally she attempted to portray it as merely organizing the paperwork, but I had a better plan. Instead, how about we reverse it? I recommended. "I'll continue to formally make the mortgage payments after you move the mortgage into my name. Then I'll immediately sign you over to Grandma's place." Mom's expression had changed, just for a single second before she disguised it with a smile. I ought to have noticed it back then. "Oh no," she blurted out. With the bank, that would be extremely difficult. Better to just wait till the mortgage is paid off. After that, we can switch both homes cleanly. Stepdad had jumped in, then nodding vigorously. It's much easier that way. Leslie, no need to involve the bank or lawyers. We're family, after all. Now that I was seated in my grandmother's rocking rocker, I could see everything clearly for the first time. That home had never been their intention. They'd wanted both their house and mine. If I'd signed up for my grandmother's house like they'd requested, a shiver raced down my spine. At this point, I would have been totally destitute. No contingency plan, no legal title to either property, just out on the street. Both residences were treasured by my family. If nothing else, I'd been smart enough to keep this house legally mine. Considering all the money I had lost, it wasn't much consolation, but it was something. A roof over my head, a location they couldn't take from me. Above all, a lesson in trust was learned, perhaps even in the case of family, particularly in relation to family. My phone rang exactly 3 days after the mortgage payment. Sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, sipping coffee, I was attempting to reconstruct my life. When the name of Mom appeared on the screen, I almost didn't answer. However, a part of me desired this conflict. I needed it, even. The mortgage payment is missing. She didn't even say hi. Her tone was abrasive and arrogant, as if I were a non-dwelling tenant instead of her daughter. The bank's going to charge us late fees. I laughed, which probably sounded a little crazy. Are you really phoning me now to demand money? I am, of course. You have a mortgage to pay. I gripped my coffee mug so tightly that my knuckles became white, saying, "Let me get this straight. You kick me out of the house I've been paying for, give it to Piper and her new husband, and you still hold me accountable for the payments? Are you crazy? It's their residence. To Piper." I interrupted her, then let Piper bear the consequences. Doesn't she presently reside there? She and her spouse are living life to the fullest at home. The house I've been paying for was renovated by me. Mom's voice got harsh. When things weren't going her way, she would invariably hit that pitch. Piper can't pay the mortgage. She recently received her college degree. She's not even working yet. They're still getting settled after their lovely wedding. It's not my issue. I interrupted her once more, experiencing an odd serenity. Calm down over me. No more. My house was given to her by you. Fantastic. Up to the halt, she received her mortgage installments. Then Mom's voice shifted, threatening the same tone she'd used to influence me from childhood. All right. After that, we'll simply return to your home. That made me laugh aloud, and it was satisfying. I'll have you arrested for trespassing like the devil if you try it. I've kicked you out once already. Are you up for a second round? You cannot simply stop making payments. We made a deal. When you gave Piper and her husband my house, you violated an agreement. In any case, you're nearly finished paying it off. What is it? About $50,000 remains. My stomach dropped as I heard the quiet on the other end. The silence was the type that precedes. Very awful news. It's Mom. It goes beyond that. She had become a little remorseful in her voice. How much more? One more pause. This time, longer. On the opposite end of the queue, I could hear her breathing. Roughly $150,000. The world appeared to tilt sideways. Fortunately, my coffee mug did not break when it fell out of my hand and clattered against the counter. What? That isn't feasible. For 4 years, I had been making extra payments on that mortgage. I contributed thousands more than was necessary. No way. So, how did you spend the additional funds I sent? My voice had become so loud that it reverberated off the walls of the kitchen. How did you handle it? The ensuing hush was deafening. The next thing my mother said chilled my blood. Oh, she responded nonchalantly, as if she were talking about the weather. We paid the regular mortgage payments. The additional funds you sent? Well, we had expenditures. Expenses? I hardly spoke above a whisper. What expenses? Well, your stepdad and I needed a vacation after all the stress of moving. We went to Europe for 3 weeks. Paris, Rome, Madrid, beautiful cities. She actually sighed dreamily. And there was the cost of Piper's college education. You are aware of the current high cost of private institutions. Naturally, we also needed to make renovations to the house. I couldn't breathe. 4 years of extra payments, thousands and thousands of dollars spent on vacations and renovations. You took my mortgage when I believed I was making mortgage payments. I was able to claim that you stole my money and used it on a trip. Leslie, stop being so theatrical. We are related. We just reallocated the cash to the areas that needed them the most. I hung up. I dropped the phone for an hour because my hands were trembling so much. I simply sat there, shaking with anger and betrayal, in my grandmother's rocking rocker. After I had stopped trembling, I blocked their numbers. All of them. Dad, Mum, Piper, done. Naturally, though, it wasn't that simple. They arrived at my door 2 days later, shouting and hammering as if they were the owners. "Now open this door." Mom's voice sounded high-pitched. "We must discuss the mortgage payment." I remained still on the opposite side of the door. "There is nothing to discuss. I refuse to spend any more money. Now you must step into your father's voice, demanding and furious. The payments are your responsibility. I'm not, in fact." Feeling more powerful with the sturdy door between us, I yelled back, "But what do you know? I do have bank statements that detail all of my transactions, emails and texts regarding our arrangement to exchange houses, evidence of fraud, as stated by the attorney I spoke with yesterday." The opposite side of the door was silent. I went on, "If you don't stop harassing me, I'll bring you before the judge. And trust me, I can afford a protracted, expensive court battle a lot better than you can. Want to try your luck?" A series of profanities that would have made a sailor blush were hurled before they left. I held my breath until I heard their car pull away, and then I let it. Tracy, my cousin, called a week later. "Leslie, you may want to be aware that your parents are having problems. They're having trouble making their mortgage payments. They depleted their retirement money and all of their savings. Piper, too." When they informed her that she needed to begin making mortgage payments, she got into a heated argument with them. Apparently, she cried that they promised her a free house, not a debt. The ranting was audible from across the street, according to the neighbors. I hung up and glanced out my window at the garden. My grandma had planted irises, and they were in flower. In contrast to the green foliage, their purple blossoms shine brightly. "You get what you sow," she had always told me. I wondered what my family would harvest from the treacherous seeds they sowed. I ceased making mortgage payments 3 months later. I heard through the grapevine that my parents had finally displayed their real colors to Piper, to my cousin. Emma called to share the tale with me. "This is unbelievable," she remarked. "In fact, they reported Piper and her husband to the police. It seems that they told Piper that she had to either start making mortgage payments or leave. When she refused, they showed up with 2 police officers and an eviction notice. The neighbor said Piper was screaming about broken promises the whole time they were packing their stuff. However, that was only the start. Family members began calling, each bringing a different piece of the jigsaw to the table, and Sarah told me they were asking everyone for loans. Ben blocked their attempt to refinance, according to Uncle Bob. Cousin Mark indicated they were looking into reverse mortgages. My eyes were truly awakened by the call that followed. The genuine information came from Mary, Mom, Sister, and, of course, the family gossip. "Did you know about the other loans?" Her voice trailed off to a whisper of conspiracy as she inquired. To pay for Piper's automobile, they obtained personal loans. She received that expensive Mercedes as a graduation present. You won't believe it, but they took out a loan to cover her honeymoon expenses, which included a 2-week trip to the Maldives with her spouse. The amount of debt they owe is enormous. I sat with that knowledge for a long time, recalling all the times I had saved money for additional mortgage payments by eating ramen noodles. My buddy Sarah at the bank provided the last piece of the puzzle. She leaned across the table, appearing worried as we were enjoying coffee. She said, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but last week the bank sent a demand letter to her parents." They have now fallen 3 months behind on their payments. I stirred my coffee slowly. Let me guess. The house is likely to be taken away from them. She gave a nod. The bank will foreclose if they don't provide the funds quickly. I knew what was going to happen. They'd show up at my door, crying and apologizing, begging for help. To put it right, they pledged to do better. Like when she originally proposed the house exchange, Mom would most likely bring her apple pie. However, I had finished dumping their ATM. I've finished viewing them. My favorite Piper. I'm done allowing them to control me. They made their decisions. Multiple mortgages, personal loans, luxury holidays, and pricey automobiles. Now, they could deal with the consequences. I surveyed the residence of my grandma, my house with its sturdy walls and gorgeous yard. She'd left it to me because she wanted me to have a stable future, not because she wanted me to bail out my parents' terrible mistakes. Everything will be lost for them. And Mary stated in her last call, "Aren't you going to aid them?" I thought about the 4 years I'd spent paying their mortgage, while they spent money on trips. I considered having my sister live in the house I paid for, having my belongings placed in the garage, and being shut out of my house. "I'm not," I eventually said. You can't help people who won't help themselves, and that's sometimes the hardest lesson to learn. My folks had already made their bed. Now they might lie in it. I had a life to live, a home of my own, and a future of my own. And Story 5, 6 a.m. on a Sunday. My husband wasn't in bed when I woke up. He was also absent from our home. A message in the refrigerator. "Farewell. In any case, I never loved you." Credit card and bank app fraud notifications began to appear on Monday, but I had to chuckle because, "What are you saying? I have an overdrawn account." As Brandon's sister yelled at him for the rent money he had given her, I looked at my phone in faux amazement and exclaimed, "That's not possible. What did he do?" I let her think I was just finding out about my husband's betrayal by speaking steadily. I'm Isla Thompson, and one of the worst decisions I've ever made was marrying Brandon. Not in his mind, though. Even though I had been anticipating it, it felt like a slap in the face when I woke up that Sunday morning to find an empty bed and a nasty letter on the refrigerator. "Farewell. In any case, I never loved you. Very elegant. Brandon." As a forensic accountant in Milwaukee, I have been investigating financial fraud for some of the largest Midwest companies for the past 15 years. Let's just say that my own spouse wasn't exactly dealing with an amateur when he began to show symptoms of organizing his big escape 3 months ago. His increased interest in our finances and his questions about our retirement accounts were the first warning signs, after allowing me to manage everything for years. Then came the hidden phone conversations, the mysterious absences, and the way he'd alter his computer screen whenever I went into the room. Typical indications of someone preparing to flee. I'd seen it all before in my line of work. What Brandon never comprehended was that every questionable transaction, every concealed purchase, every attempt to stealthily relocate our money, I saw it all. Every action he performed in an attempt to defraud me was recorded, captured on camera, and forwarded directly to my attorney. He thought he had pulled off the ideal getaway when he left that letter, but I had previously shifted our funds, tagged our accounts, and planned for every possible scenario he would try. I couldn't help but smile as the fraud notifications began to flood my phone that Monday morning. Brandon believed he was 10 steps ahead, but he was unaware that he was putting himself in a dangerous situation. Notifications, declined transactions, unsuccessful withdrawal attempts, and blocked accounts continued beeping on the phone. Each one was like melody to my ears. My palm touched the just-in-case folder on my desk, which contained months' worth of evidence that would ruin not only his escape strategy, but his whole future. I nearly felt terrible for him when I heard his sister's frantic voice on the phone. Nearly. I may have seemed distraught to you, learning that I was never truly loved by my 8-year husband. The problem with being a forensic accountant, however, is this. You get the ability to recognize patterns. When they conceal something, people believe they are being clever. Money, however, leaves a trace, always. Brandon as well. He covered everything with breadcrumbs. 6 years ago, Brandon and I met at a charity gala. He seemed to have his life together, was charming, and was successful, or so he said. He drove a fancy car, worked as an investment advisor, and discussed creating a future with her. I was amazed by his confidence, his desire. In hindsight, I should have seen how evasive he was about his history and how he consistently sidestepped inquiries about his clientele. I adore it. At least I believed that the first 3 years were good. We discussed establishing a baby, planned exotic holidays, and purchased a lovely home in the Milwaukee suburbs. He would become defensive whenever I questioned him about his student loans, or he would shift the topic when I brought up meeting his former coworkers, but there were always these minor details that didn't quite add up. "You don't trust me," he'd say, turning it around on me. "You need to know everything, but why? Don't you think I can handle my own finances?" Traditional manipulation, I'd seen it numerous times in my career. People employing emotional influence to avoid financial openness. However, I chose to overlook it because I wanted to have faith in us, within him. That was my first error. Then came the indications I couldn't ignore. Last Christmas, he insisted on separate accounts for our holiday spending. "It'll be more romantic if we surprise each other," he said. However, I saw the credit card statements that he believed he had concealed, which showed purchases at upscale jewelry retailers. I never got any jewelry. The weekend business trips that didn't match any conferences I could find. The mysterious calls from numbers that always went straight to voicemail when I was around. Not most wives might have confronted their husbands immediately, but I'm not most wives. Rather, I began obtaining bank statements, monitoring transactions, and constructing a case. He was actually providing me with more proof each time he believed he was hiding something. I assumed I was unaware of everything as I watched him attempt to gradually deplete our accounts. Once more, "You're working late?" he'd ask, feigning concern while I sat at my computer. "Just catching up on some cases," I'd say, not revealing that the case I was working on was his. 3 weeks ago was the tipping point. I was working late, truly late this time, when my coworker Susan raced to my desk. Her face was pale and she was holding her phone like it could bite her. "You need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. "I was reviewing the Thompson case files when I found something. It has to do with Brandon." My stomach dropped as I looked at her screen. It was there. Brandon's name linked to a series of suspicious transactions we were investigating, not as a witness or a victim, but as a person of interest. The same patterns I've been tracking in our personal accounts were showing up in his professional dealings. He wasn't just planning to leave me, he was running from something far greater. "There's more," Susan whispered, scrolling through the documents. "He's been named in 3 other fraud investigations. Different states, different names, but the same MO. He seeks successful ladies, marries them, then vanishes with their money." Just before he relocated to Milwaukee, the last one took place in Phoenix. The parts began to fit together, the charm, the secrecy, the sudden interest in our finances. It was all part of his program. I wasn't his spouse. I was his next aim. And he had no idea that his newest mark was someone who specialized in capturing individuals precisely like him. That night, I sat in our kitchen until daybreak, going through everything with fresh eyes. The loving husband act, the careful manipulation, the way he'd slowly tried to isolate me from my friends and family. It was also clear now. I found myself giggling, not because it was hilarious, but because of the sheer irony. He'd picked the wrong woman to con. As if nothing were wrong, I prepared every morning for the next 3 weeks at Kiss Him Goodbye. Every night I'd listen to his tales about work while logging every questionable transaction. I relocated our funds, called the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and gathered information that would not only protect me, but aid his prior victims. "You appear different now." "One night," he said, examining my face. "Is everything all right?" I grinned as I considered the trap I had built, and how his own conceit would ultimately lead to his demise. "Just exhausted from work," I said. "This time of year, you are aware of how things may get." He nodded sympathetically, probably believing I was working hard to acquire more money for him to take. If he'd paid more attention, he may have caught the glitter in my eye, the one that claimed I was fully aware of his plans. But con men like Brandon never think they'll be the ones getting conned. And that's the problem with those who earn a living by deceiving others. They don't anticipate being the ones being played. His plan began to take shape the morning after Brandon vanished, just as he had anticipated. The first call came from our bank. Unusual behavior. Multiple withdrawal attempts. All credit cards were used up. His sister Kelly, who was furious over the money he had borrowed, gave him the second. The third came from Rachel Clark in Phoenix, who wanted to know whether I knew the whereabouts of her husband. Her spouse. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I apologize. What were you saying? I sat down at my kitchen table and tightened my hold on my phone. Brandon Murphy. Legally, he is still my husband. Anger tightened Rachel's voice as she explained. He disappeared with my savings 3 years ago. Since then, I've been following him. In spite of myself, I smile. In fact, he went by Brandon Thompson here. And you're not going to believe this, but I've been awaiting your call. Rachel and I compared notes over the course of the following hour. Same attractive smile, same investment advisor tale, same practice of steadily emptying funds before leaving. However, there was one significant distinction this time. Me? I've gathered enough evidence to bring him down, I informed her, but I need your aid to catch him. At that moment, a text message from Brandon buzzed through my phone. I apologize. Can we discuss just one final time? Excellent. He was following the pattern I discovered in Rachel's case, reaching out after the initial disappearance, trying to manipulate his way into one last chance to access any remaining funds. I showed the text to my lawyer, who was already preparing our counterattack. Let's set the trap, she said, her eyes gleaming. I consented to meet Brandon in a downtown coffee shop. He was there when I got there, looking suitably repentant. His eyes were red. His garments were a little rumpled. The ideal representation of a man who had committed a grave error. Isla. I'm so sorry. He started to reach across the table for my hand. I've been dealing with some terrible investments and other stuff. I went into a panic. I pulled my hand away, playing my part perfectly. How much trouble are you in, Brandon? His eyes lit up. Just a flicker, but I caught it. He thought I was falling for it. About $200,000. But I have a plan to remedy everything. I just need access to our emergency fund. I feigned to contemplate it, watching him squirm. The emergency fund, correct, the one you attempted to empty yesterday. Before he recovered, his face fell for a brief moment. That was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly, but if you help me now, I promise to what? To disappear again or to remain around long enough to deplete my accounts as you did to Rachel in Phoenix. For the first time since I'd known him, the color faded from his face. Murphy, Brandon Thompson, or whatever his true name was, looked genuinely shocked. You know, the funny thing is, I continued, sliding a folder across the table, if you'd done your research, you might have realized that stealing from a forensic accountant wasn't your smartest move. Just then, 2 FBI agents approached our table. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Oh, and Brandon, you might want to call a lawyer. As the FBI agents led Brandon away, it was a good one. My phone lit up with a call from Susan. She couldn't have come at a better time. We've got him, she said, her voice triumphant. The team just finished analyzing those offshore accounts you flagged. Brandon isn't just running a marriage con, he's been operating a massive Ponzi scheme. We're looking at fraud in the $1 million. I watched through the coffee shop window as Brandon was placed in a federal vehicle. He looked small now, nothing like the confident man who thought he'd outsmarted me. How many victims? I asked, already knowing the answer would be ugly. 23 so far, spanning 5 states, 12 marriages, all to successful women in finance. But here's the kicker, he was planning something bigger. We found evidence of a new investment firm he was setting up. He was going to use your credentials and reputation to lure in high net worth clients. I thought about all those late nights when he'd ask about my cases, showing sudden interest in my work. He wasn't being supportive. He was gathering information, planning to exploit my professional reputation for his biggest scam yet. The irony, I said, is that if he hadn't gotten greedy, if he just stuck to his usual marriage scam, he might have gotten away again. But he just had to go bigger. That's not even the best part, Susan continued. Remember that country club membership he insisted on last year? Turns out he was using it to meet his next target, Caroline Mitchell, the hedge fund manager. He was already laying the groundwork for his next disappearing act. I recalled all the Sunday golf games, the late-night networking events while he was playing the devoted husband at home. He was setting up his next victim. But Caroline Mitchell wasn't just ordinary hedge fund manager. She was one of my closest friends, and she'd been working with me to capture Brandon's every action for months. Let me guess, I said. Caroline gave you access to all their private conversations. Every email, every text, every recorded discussion in the club lounge. He practically offered us a plan of his entire enterprise while attempting to entice her. The guy practically wrote our case for us. I couldn't help but chuckle. Brandon had spent months methodically organizing his exit, thinking he was the brightest person in the room. Meanwhile, every individual he believed he was influencing had been working together, compiling a watertight case against him. "Have you heard from his sister, Kelly?" I asked, thinking of her anxious phone this morning. "That's another fascinating thread," Susan answered. "Turns out she's not his sister at all. She's an accomplice. They've been conducting the fraud together for years. She plays the desperate sister to explain why he needs to borrow money urgently right before he disappears. As we speak, she is being picked up in Chicago. I reclined in my chair and absorbed everything. Brandon's blindness was as astounding as the extent of his deceit. He had been so preoccupied with keeping his lies true that he had failed to see the trap that was closing in on him. Susan said there was one more thing. We discovered who he really was. He is neither Murphy nor Brandon Thompson. This is Brandon Roberts, who has been wanted in Canada since 2015 for fraud. As I considered the enormous case file that was awaiting me on my desk, I grinned. Well, Brandon Roberts, welcome to your worst nightmare. My phone buzzed once again just as I was about to return to the office. It came from an unidentified number this time. You don't know what's going to happen, but you think you're smart. Examine your email. The message was followed by an email featuring extensive images of me with my family, my daily routines, even views through my home windows. Anger, not fear, was what sent a shiver down my spine. Brandon had hired someone to watch me. I called Agent Morrison, the FBI agent handling Brandon's case, after forwarding everything to Susan and my attorney. "There's already another player on the game," she said. The photos were sent from an IP address we've been monitoring James Foster, Brandon's former cellmate from a brief stint in Phoenix. As Brandon's muscle, he has been intimidating victims who approach too closely in order to reveal the plan. I wondered if this was the reason Rachel Clark had been silent for so long. Now, where is he? That's the problem. We can't locate him, but he's probably... Agent Morrison stopped mid-sentence. Wait a moment. One of Brandon's frozen accounts is moving. Someone from inside your home is attempting to access it. My house? Where? I'd left my laptop open. I gave Rachel a call right away. Is everything okay there? We've got a problem, she muttered. Kelly's here. She must have had a key. She's trying to access Brandon's accounts from your computer. Kelly, the false sister who was supposed to be in detention in Chicago. My mind raced through the possibilities. Either she'd escaped or Rachel. Get out of there now. Kelly's not working alone. I heard a crash in the background, followed by Rachel's sharp intake of breath. Too late. Foster's here too. My heart pounded, but my mind remained clear. This was exactly the type of desperate action I'd imagined. Rachel, remember what we discussed? The time has come. I heard Rachel's cool voice over the phone. Hey, Kelly, before you do anything stupid, you might want to look at what's on that screen. Knowing exactly what they were observing, I grinned. Not all of the evidence, accounts, or files were simply kept on my laptop. The FBI servers were receiving a live stream of it. Plus, the whole house was under surveillance with agents stationed nearby. It's finished, I heard Rachel say. Look outside. Within minutes, FBI agents descended upon my home and sirens blared in the background. Both Kelly and Foster were in custody, and Rachel was safe. I drove home to find Agent Morrison waiting for me. "Quite a performance," she said. "You knew they'd try something like this. People like Brandon, Kelly, and Foster, they always get desperate at the end. They're so used to being in control that they can't handle losing it." I looked at my house now, a crime scene. I just had to make them think they had one last chance to win. Well, with this attempted break-in and the threats, we can add witness intimidation and conspiracy charges to their list. Agent Morrison smiled. "I'd say your trap worked perfectly." I thought about Brandon sitting in his cell, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this. He had no idea that his desperate final move had just given us everything we needed to ensure he'd never scam anyone again. 2 months later, I sat in the courtroom watching Brandon's world crumble around him. Gone was the confident smile, replaced by a look of utter defeat as the judge read out his sentence. Brandon Roberts for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison. I caught his eye as they led him away for a moment. His mask slipped completely, and I saw the panic beneath the man who'd written "Never loved you anyway" on a note in my fridge, now faced a future where love was the least of his concerns. Kelly and Foster didn't fare much better. Both took plea deals, but they'd still serve significant time as part of their agreements. They provided evidence against Brandon's entire network, exposing operations in 3 countries. Rachel sat beside me, squeezing my hand as Brandon's victims, my unexpected sisters in survival, stood one by one to share their impact statements. Each woman told a similar story of betrayal, but ended with the same note of triumph. We'd not only gotten justice, we'd gotten our power back. After the sentencing, Agent Morrison approached me with a smile. "The Bureau could use someone with your skills. Have you ever considered consulting for us?" I thought about all the other Brandons out there, all the scammers who thought they were too clever to get caught. "What do you know? I think I'd like that." As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Milwaukee sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years. Brandon thought he destroyed me, but he'd only made me stronger. And now, I had a new mission. Ensuring he would be the last con man to underestimate a woman with a talent for numbers and a mind for justice. 6 months after Brandon's sentencing, I stood at a podium in a packed conference room at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Milwaukee. Behind me was a presentation detailing what they now called the Thompson case, though that wasn't his real name or mine anymore. I'd taken back my maiden name, wanting nothing to do with any of Brandon's aliases. The modern con artist doesn't use a gun. I told the room full of agents and analysts. They use trust, manipulation, and technology, but they all leave a trail. You just have to know where to look. The program I developed with the FBI was already showing results. 3 major romance scam rings have been busted in the past month alone. Rachel had become one of our most valuable consultants, her experience helping us understand how these predators chose their targets. After the presentation, I checked my phone to find a message from Susan. Another victim of Brandon's had been located in Vancouver. Unlike the rest of us, she'd lost everything: her house, her savings, her business. But this time, we could help her recover what was stolen. The forensic team had finally cracked Brandon's encrypted files, revealing accounts he'd hidden all over the world. I thought about that Sunday morning when I found his note. How he tried to break me with 5 cruel words. Instead, he'd given me a gift. The chance to help others fight back against people like him. My new apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, and as I sat on my balcony that evening, I smiled at the irony. Brandon had spent his life taking things from strong women, but in the end, he'd inadvertently created something powerful. A network of survivors turned warriors, all dedicated to taking down men like him. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just